Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things. Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Pardew. Joining me today is Rasco's Modern Life and Major Key 600, aka Rasco and Kieran. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey.
And I just want to welcome everyone to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions that geeky gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by a biased educational system, except that's not at all what we do, not even kind of. I just really like that joke. Anyway, before we get into the topic of this episode, which is the crimes of the past and what exactly that means, since I don't think anyone knows besides me, which is just the best. Before we get into that, it's one of those things where I actually have to explain the topic, and you can't just figure it out from the title. I'm happy about that, because so often this whole section is redundant. Before I get into all that, I want you, the listeners, to know, yes, you can download episodes of Geeky Gentlemen and listen on the go. Kieran, where can they find the link to download the episode?
Ooh, at 3 in the morning? I have no idea.
I know where.
Where, Rasco, where?
In the description!
Yes, you can. And hey, check it out. If you want to download old episodes of Geeky Gentlemen and listen on the go, you can leave comments on old episodes to let me know, and I will post it and let you know that the episode's up. Rasco, where can they find old episodes of Geeky Gentlemen?
In the playlist.
Bam! You were on it, man.
Older episode.
You were fucking on it, bro. Okay, so the title for this episode is The Crimes of the Past. Now, what I'm curious about is what you two think that means.
I think I know what it is. I think we're going to be talking about how, responsible people in the present are for the crimes of the past, or if they bear any burden of what their ancestors did, or something like that. That's what my prediction is.
Okay, Kieran, what's your prediction? Not without being influenced by Rasco's.
Ian, confess to me your sins.
No, Rasco did have it. Rasco was right on the money. That is exactly what we're going to be talking about. Because it's this interesting thing with history, and I don't know if Kieran has any interest in history whatsoever, if he was just no, I just want to be on Geeky Gentlemen. I find myself to be someone who is incredibly interested
I'm just here.
Yeah. I find history incredibly fascinating, and I find myself, particularly in November, which is a month that has a lot of history in it. The joke of why we do History Month on Geeky Gentlemen in November is because it's the month with the Holiday of Lies, or as it's more popularly known, Thanksgiving. It's the month that I was born in, so I find myself thinking about how old I am and what I've witnessed a lot in November. It's the month in which we host presidential elections every 4 years in the United States. There's just a lot of history packed in November. And so I find myself be someone who's genuinely interested in history, and this is a topic that comes up a lot. Rasco, what are your feelings just generally in regards to history as a subject?
I really like history. I always find history to be really interesting. In many ways, sometimes it's stranger than real. It's stranger than fiction. Actually, that's what the phrase is. History is really it's great for just the wow, it's fascinating to look back and see what happened, but it's also important because it really informs the present, and you can see the evolution of how certain ideas and how certain, different ideologies kind of formed into different groups over time. And it just gives you a greater perspective of how the battle lines, I guess, were drawn, and how we got to where we are.
Okay, and Kieran, what's your background? What's your views on history as a subject?
As a subject, I studied the crap out of it in college.
Oh, interesting.
Well, standardly in college, because we had to pick several different subjects, and my main one was film class. But to kind of fill in the gap, just because I would never major in it, but to study because I'm interested and fascinated into different things, I would go into history. Granted, surprise, surprise, that's what I did the most of, Asian history. Well done me. But I did most, obviously, stuff like World War II, World War One, a lot of American history, because we Brits don't have that fascinating of history, apparently.
What the fuck?
Yeah, believe it or not. Believe it or
That
not.
always gets me. I knew a girl from Puerto Rico, and I asked her, so what did you learn about in history class? I'm just curious, because, it's not exactly... it makes sense if you live in the United States proper that you'd learn United States history. So I asked her, what did you learn about in history class? Did you, learn anything particular about the history of Puerto Rico or Latin America? And she goes, no, we studied U.S. history, Civil War, dead presidents. I'm like, the fuck? Why don't they teach... okay, yeah, I've decided what we're talking about for the Thanksgiving special. Anyway, so yeah, tonight we're discussing the crimes of the past, and it is that idea of how responsible are modern people, modern societies, for what their ancestors did. And it's this really interesting kind of... it's almost doublethink in a lot of ways when you really get down to it, because... if I were to, have Rasco arrested because his dad murdered my mother or something like that, that would be crazy. That would be, legitimately the craziest thing you could do. If Rasco had nothing to do with the actions of his father murdering my mother, but I insisted that Rasco be arrested because his father died, that would be absolutely batshit insane.
Mm-hmm.
But... for some reason, as the scale gets bigger as far as the number of people affected, I find, at least, that the weight of the responsibility for horrible things that your ancestors did does fall upon you, even though you personally had nothing to do with it. Where is everyone else sitting on this one?
I think I'm going to be probably on the far opposite end, where... I kind of really resist the idea that you bear responsibility for the decisions that your ancestors have made. That doesn't mean I think that you don't have somewhat of an obligation to, be aware of what's happened in the past and make sure that doesn't happen again. But I don't see... so I'd probably be on the opposite side from you. Okay, and
Kieran?
I'm kind of in alignment with both of you in a weird sense. It's kind of the idea that you don't have, from a morality standpoint, you don't have any attachments to your ancestry, from a morality standpoint, because you are your own person. Yes, you technically are from this bloodline, but you would have different experiences, different opinions, different whatnot, so what they would do may be completely opposite to what you do, or it might align with, or it might be, indifferent. It depends on, what person you are. But, like Rasco said, because it's technically a bloodline, you do maybe bear some responsibility. Not a lot. Not as in, you have to apologize for them, or you have to take the rap from them, or for, past crimes, something like that. But you bear the responsibility of that is your past, that is something to do with you.
And see, this is where I think, your personal background, your personal heritage, kind of radically affects your viewpoint on this, because I am Hispanic, Native American, and Irish, which are three groups of people with just a fantastic track record with imperialism.
Especially
I don't
Irish.
know Rasco's background.
I'll explain. I'm actually I'm Irish. I'm actually a significant portion Cherokee Indian, which you would never be able to tell. And because it's my mother's grandmother is straight up Cherokee Indian.
Okay.
And so I don't know what that makes me, but and then French, I think.
Okay. And Kieran, I'm assuming, is just straight British.
Are we just going by ancestry line of what went into me?
Yeah, just like however, like, what you know about your family history, what you know about your actual
My
heritage.
ancestry history, because we did this in college as well, so yeah, thankfully, thank you, college, for making me look up my own ancestry. We are everywhere. It's odd. It's really weird. We're everywhere. Not going like too far back, because at that point it's just crazy. But there is Scottish there.
Mm-hmm.
There is Irish there. There is British there. There is American in there, believe it or not. And then here's the thing that really weirds me out, not because of the nationality, because I didn't actually think this would be a thing. I was like, I don't know how it dates back, because I don't know the full story, but I just look at the line, German.
Yeah, okay, so a lot of European, though.
Yeah.
And see, this is why I think, like, your racial background, your racial heritage does affect where you stand on this. Yeah, I do, like I said, I do think that you, in some way, shape, or form, bear some level of responsibility for the crimes of your ancestors. As someone who is Native American background, like, you, of course, didn't tell soldiers to give blankets filled with SARS to my people. I know that.
Mm.
I know that didn't happen, right? Any white person, full-blooded American listening to this, I know that didn't happen. But you can't deny that the fact that you helped, that your ancestors made a genocide expedient in this country of my people, helped you to expand across the nation and take up the resources that have made this nation a very powerful force in the world. Like, that's kind of undeniable. The genocide of the Native Americans by European Americans helped create a white America. And America, of course, is a very prosperous nation because of its abundant resources. I don't think that's too far to say. You can't deny that your ancestors had a part in doing that. That's historical fact. These aren't like, you can maybe say, well, the Europeans didn't know they were introducing diseases. You can say that to a point, but there were calculated moves that are well documented that were intentional, not only physical genocide, but cultural genocide. So I don't understand how you can say, well, we bear no responsibility. You're still benefiting from what your ancestors did. Like, I said it would be crazy to haul someone in for a murder that their father committed, and I agree with that. But if your father robbed a bank, and you were living off of the funds from that bank that he robbed, you don't get to keep all the stuff. It gets taken because of the crime he committed, right?
Mm.
So that's kind of where I stand on this, is the crimes of the past, no one's going to hold you accountable for those. No one's going to say, you did X, Y, and Z when you didn't exist yet.
Mm.
But I do think that there is, on some level, a moral responsibility to account for. I don't know, Rasko, since you're kind of on the opposite, how do you feel about all that?
My stance really comes from just the fundamental idea that I don't believe that you're responsible for you're not responsible via association. I don't like this idea that, like, because of any sort of association with someone else, like, their actions somehow reflect upon yours, because I believe in the individual being responsible for the actions that they take. I don't believe in the individual being responsible for the actions that their group makes, and I believe that across the board. So, I mean, when we talk about how far back, like, for starters, like, how do you get to choose, like, what parts of your heritage, like, because here's what I don't understand about, like, how is it ideally addressed? Like,
Mhm.
because like someone like me, like I'm white, like I identify as white, but like I said, like my mother, you'd look at her and you'd know, like, oh, she's a significant portion Cherokee Indian, and then her grandmother, and then my mother's, and then my grandmother, they're also, like, you could look at them and tell. So like I don't identify as like a Cherokee Indian, and
Mhm.
because like, but do I get to claim that I deserve something because that's part of my lineage? No. Like, I don't think I deserve anything because of something that happened to the people in my life. Just the same way, I don't think that I just don't think that I'm entitled to anything because of any aspect of my lineage. And the same.
Okay, so you're more on the scale of it's too late to do anything about it, and you wouldn't understand the logistics of how it would be fairly justified.
Yeah, it comes from
how it'd be fairly reparations.
Yeah. Here's another. You just made me think of something else when you said that. Like I don't believe in this idea that like I believe in like you adequately address the problem in a way that is perfect, like that is as close to perfect and will never need to be altered again in the future, right? So like if you decide now, like, okay, we have to do like reparations for things that this culture did to this culture in the past, or this race did to this race, like eventually at some point that will be out of date and you would have to therefore change it again. I just believe in setting the record straight so that same inequality never happens again in the future, but I don't believe in punishing, just because I don't believe in general that it makes sense to like punish. That's kind of like a thing with Western culture, how it's been influenced by like Judeo-Christian philosophy, where they believe in punishment for like the sin. Like, and that's bled into a lot of aspects of Western civilization, is that like we do have this idea of like you're punished for your sin, whereas there's a lot of other countries and European countries, and I think Germany, where like they don't have that same like a criminal is punished for their acts. And even then, like, I'm not saying I line up with that, but like I just don't believe in this idea that like I believe in like actually addressing the problem so that it's permanently fixed for the future.
Okay, well, like, how do you feel about the fact that, and, you know, Indian genocide is what made me think of this topic, so I'm gonna try not to be too much on that. We can talk about other things, but
there's plenty of genocides to go around. We can.
Yeah, exactly.
Pick one of them. Just there's a basket of them. Pick one. Which one do you want to talk about?
That's the sad part, is how true that is. But like, here's my thing. There is still a responsible party that was there when it happened and is still there today, and that is the United States government. I think that's a very important thing to talk about, because you are right. How is it fairly distributed when it happened with people who are no longer alive now that the gene pool has become so interspersed and stuff? I agree that does make it a bit messy, but the responsible party for committing a lot of those acts was the American government. It was, you know, Jackson himself sanctioned the Trail of Tears, which is one of the most horrific acts of American genocide. As far as I can tell, there hasn't been a break in the federal government, United States government.
And can they be held responsible? Is that where you're going with this? Because
yeah, shouldn't they be held responsible?
Yeah, I think, and here's why. You know, this isn't. It's not unheard of for the government to do things that would consider being like easing a problem financially. We have a thing called quantitative easing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Government just gives money and funnels it where it needs to be through a process of quantitative easing. So, you know, I do think that maybe on some level the government is required to like literally pay money. I think that's arguable. Like, I think that like literal like financial compensation for certain families, but kind of like a one and done. So like we get the current generation that is entitled to this, we get it to them, and then that money can now trickle down through generation after generation. I don't think it's like a continuous thing, but I do think like a one-time, like, okay, let's look at all the generations across the board that maybe deserve some sort of financial easing. And
here's my problem with that. Here's where I don't think that idea of a one-time thing works. The wealth, the resources, the prosperity that has been experienced here in America is exponential in relation to what was taken. You cannot... I don't see an argument where you can say, well, it was... these people's lives were worth X amount of dollars with interest, so you get this one lump sum, when the fact of the matter is the United States is still sitting on gold reserves.
No, that's fair. I mean, I just ultimately think, like, how do you...
And I'll agree, the logistics are...
How do you, like, look at, like, other... There have been people, though, like, who, yeah, maybe, like, at one point in their life, like, they had money that had been passed down generation after generation after generation. But there are people that, like, completely lost all of their money and have, like, recuperated and then went on to be millionaires later on in their lives. And, like, or just not even millionaires, but just, like, financially, you know, I guess, stable. That's happened before. Like, those people aren't still benefiting from the fortune of their families. And do you have to, like, literally... Like, like, how do you know truly who's actually still benefiting from fortune that was, I guess, gathered from their ancestors?
Again, I think the United States government is still benefiting. I think that's undeniable. There's a really interesting case study if you look at what was given and taken back. It's funny, we have the phrase Indian giver, which is they gave it to me, but then they decided they wanted it back. And it's like the most bullshit phrase ever. But the United States government gave Native Americans the Black Hills, I think it's called, in North Dakota, which they then found after giving it away, like its official signed documentation was given to them. After giving it away, they found massive gold reserves there. And so then the United States government took that land back. So it's like this really bitterly funny example of the Indian giver process. But so you have all these resources that were, like, undeniably stolen. And so I think the thing is, you have a debt that can never be repaid, which is a scary thing to accept responsibility for. But how responsible should someone in the modern context be for that debt is the question. And I don't... Like, I can see an argument that logistically it'd be very difficult. I can see an argument that it's a nightmare logistically and it doesn't seem just fundamentally fair. But at the same time, what was done was not fair in the first place. And I think that's the case with anything that we talk about on this subject line. What was done was unforgivable, and now you are saying what we did was unforgivable, but we don't want to really put the effort in to make up for it.
I mean, if you can't make up for it, then why would you try? It's possible.
That's like the worst. That's like the worst fucking thing ever.
It's like, true. Well, come on, you can't accomplish your task. Just give up. Come on.
But like on a moral standpoint, that's like the worst thing ever, right? It's like, well, we can never do anything about it. So what? Do we just continue ignoring the problem?
Well, okay, I'm kind of changing my mind now about what I've said, because here's the thing. Do you want is the government responsible, or is it the people that were in power specifically who are responsible? Because honestly, like, because I actually do like the idea, though, that, like, the government, like, you can't, it's just like an entity, like, it's not a thing. It's the people there that did things historically that were just horrible atrocities. That would be like Andrew Jackson and stuff like that.
And Andrew Jackson was the president of the United States when he committed a historical atrocity.
Yeah.
It'd be like if the Nazi Party somehow still remained in control of Germany after World War II, and yet didn't feel the need to do anything to make up to the Jewish community. That would be absurd. That would be literally absurd.
I mean,
I don't know, Kieran, you haven't talked in a bit, so go ahead. You sound like you have input on that one.
You both have... I've just been listening the entire time. You both have interesting points in the matter. It's kind of... It's weird, and I agree with you kind of morally. That's where things get a bit messed up, because you gotta think, morally, do you have to pay for what's been done in the past? But at the same time, you gotta think how severe was it? Like, you're using obviously the American government system as an example, right? You can take any example of almost anything and say that society, not modern society, just society in general, because there was a time when the past was modern society and they did this too, and then the past before them was modern society and they did this too. So society in general breed and live off, for lack of a better word, the sacrifices that the past and ancestry have made and then benefit off it. So where do you point the finger at that point? Because everyone's doing it.
Oh, it's a great little thing of history of trying to trace it back to a point, because you have the idea of, oh, well, this leader was a terrible person and they bear the brunt of all the horrible things that happened in their society at the time, but are they really responsible because the system allowed them to become the leader, so maybe the system's responsible. Well, is the system really responsible when the world
it's just
has...
a never-ending loop.
Yeah, it's a never-ending loop, and pretty soon you're blaming Julius Caesar for the actions of Andrew Jackson. And it's just crazy.
So this question in my head, like, I just kind of had an epiphany in my head. Like, I think that, for me, what really matters is that, like, you can make the argument that, like, as a person, let's just, like, say, for example, a white person or, like, a Jew... Or not a Jew, a German, like a normal German child of Nazi Germany, you can say that, like, yeah, they have a responsibility to, like, acknowledge how, like, maybe certain things in the past gave them a leg up in the present to some degree or another. You can, that's fine as, like, a person to acknowledge that, maybe. And maybe, like, for them to try to take action in their own private life. But I don't think that it's the government's place to step in and, like, have the government go through this, like, reassessment of, like, what needs to happen. I think that that's more of a thing that, like, as an individual, as a person, that's your responsibility, maybe, but not the government.
I think it is, because especially if it's a government that became deposed after the fact or something, and now it's a new government in power, that's different, because that's what happened with the Soviet Union in the middle of World War I. They overthrew the Russian monarchy. That's a different thing. But I feel if there's a continuity of government without any major breaks, and I mean, to be fair, between Andrew Jackson and now we had a civil war, which you could say could have constituted a major break, but guess what? The side that preserved the Union and continued the Manifest Destiny westward expansion won that war. So there is a clear continuity of leadership and of responsibility.
But I think that it's wrong to have the government now be the ones that just go through and reallocate, like, citizens' money. Like, if you want to hold the government responsible the same way that you could hold, like, a police department responsible or something like that, like,
well, police department is, of course, a government agency.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's, like, a small scale example, like, of, like, how you could be wronged by the government, and then, like, I think you would have, like, legal recourse. But I think, yeah, like, that makes sense to hold the government responsible, but at the same time, like, if you address it so long after the fact, it's really something where, like, that horrible injustice happens when it gets swept under the rug for so long, and we have to talk about whether or not justice should have been served, like, this long after. Like, it's kind of the thing where it's like, you have to realistically address that problem when it happens or shortly after, because we were able to do that with things like World War II, but But like with the Trail of Tears, that's not something that we really talk about that much in America, except when we decide to actually look into the darker aspects of our history. Like that's been just not in the public consciousness the same way that like the Holocaust
Slavery.
was, or slavery or something like that.
Yeah, and slavery is, of course, something that they still, like, United States government sanctioned and allowed slavery. It gave initially the constitutional right to own slaves, and yet, to this day, over 200 years after... Wait, did I get that right? No, not 200 years. 150-ish years after slavery was abolished, the United States government has still not apologized for slavery, much less done anything to make up for it. And that's... I don't know, like, if the government never sanctioned it, but it was happening, that's one thing, but the government sanctioned it. The government provided rules and allowed for it. The government used slave labor to get certain things done in different areas of the country when it was legal. I don't know how you can say that the government isn't responsible for those things just because they happened a long time ago.
I mean, no,
if there's a continuity of government, I feel that the government does bear responsibility for the actions of its past.
I just don't know what, like, the significance of blaming, like, because it was people in the government. Like, I just don't understand, like, how we can adequately address the wrongdoing of an entity that is completely it's unrecognizable to what it was at that time, with the people that are in charge and making these decisions and the ideologies at hand. Like, it's just so different. Like, I just don't know how it makes sense to punish such a different entity that's so far removed from that. And I don't know, like, how does it, like, what are you adequately, like, blaming in this case? Like, I just don't understand, like, how we adequately address this problem in a way that's...
And I think what's interesting is there's no example where it has been adequately addressed. Not just looking at the United States. I don't want to put everything on the United States. It's just another imperial power. I don't think there's any situation where the scars of imperialism and the crimes of the past have been, at least nothing's coming to mind for me, have been adequately addressed, where everyone seems to have come out fine from it. I certainly think there are times where governments have made moves to make up for their wrongs. Britain giving India back is one of them.
That's the thing, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't feel like there's... I struggle to think of any one example where I'm like, okay, that is perfectly satisfied, you've made up for it. Britain giving India back is a given. That is the first step in making up for it. Now you have to repair the damage you've done.
Which they barely did, but they did.
Not at all, but...
They helped with restoration slightly, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, okay.
But that was it. That was nothing. That was, like, a few cost damage stuff. That was it.
Yeah, so the idea... Like, I'll agree, Rascal, I don't know how you do it, because I don't think it's been done yet. And the answer might be... you can't. And I think that's the real travesty of the crime. Like, it's kind of interesting to talk about it as a crime, right? Because we have this idea of jail, and we have this idea of if you commit crime A, you get sentence X, and yada, yada, yada. But a lot of people will tell you, like, there'll be families of murder victims whose murderer was caught, tried, and put on death row and executed. And they'll tell you it didn't make it better. Yeah. There's this idea of how do you adequately punish a crime? And the answer might be you can't. It's an interesting thing, and I don't want to get too much because it's too tangential, but the idea of a prisoner never truly atones, because we have this idea of prison is for atonement. You commit your crime, you go to prison for it, you serve your sentence, you're out, you've done your time, and so people shouldn't be able to hold that against you anymore because you've paid your debt to society. But we still do. Like, I mean, even if someone served time for it, would you really hire a shoplifter? Like, maybe you would, but would you hold it against someone for not doing that? So this idea of can someone ever truly make up for the crime, and when a crime is as horrible as continued genocide, as keeping people in bondage for hundreds of years, can it ever be made up for?
That's getting into the idea of atonement, which you're getting into really hardcore morality there.
Right?
Which atonement, in its base form, as an idea, is impossible. It's actually impossible. The actual essence of atonement, it can't actually be done because, again, it depends on your crime. But let's take mass slaughter, right? Let's take a group of people, a town of people, kill them all. It's one person or a group of people kills them all, right? But let's say we blame it on the head honcho, the guy that ordered it to happen, the one that it was his idea, whatnot, or maybe one guy did it, whichever scenario you want to go for. Say he did it, and then he goes to prison. He pays his time, God knows how, when. Granted, that should get him life, but he pays his time, he does his dues, what have you. Let's say he's morally agrees that what he did was wrong for whatever justification reason, because the problem with scenarios like that, problem with scenarios with anything, like you said before, with imperialists and governments and anything and ever, whenever a decision's made that fucks everyone over, it's done for a reason. Whether it's a good reason or not, that then comes into a matter of opinion. But at a time, whoever does this decision thinks it's a right one. Whether they agree or not, then that's up to, obviously, that's kind of the kind of hindsight's a bitch when it comes to historians, and you look back at past, because obviously you can tell in the long run that wasn't probably a great idea. But, that hindsight's a bitch in that sense. But let's say the person, agrees that morally what he did was wrong. And then what would your atonement be? First off, that's like a big question. How would you make up for what you've done? Because you could say sorry, but that's not exactly going to help, is it? You need a form of atonement. Now, what you're looking for, really, is if you actually think what you've done is wrong, you're looking for a way to make yourself feel better. So whatever you do is not really helping the lives that you've wrecked in whatever action that you performed. It doesn't help the country that you've kind of damaged. It's a way for you to kind of feel better about yourself if you just go out and help other people or try and make other lives better for what you've done. So that again is the essence of morality there. So true atonement, so where everyone would forgive you, people could hire you again, like you were saying before, stuff like that. Not going to happen, because you can't have everyone or anyone in some sense fully forgive you knowing of an action like that, of what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
It's, if I was to put a banana reference, Kenshin is a good example.
Oh, yeah.
That is a perfect example. Plus, that's imperialism. He was on the side of imperialism, so that works really well. Manslaughter, full on, millions died, and there's an entire villain that wants him dead because he ruined his life by killing the only family member he knew. The only family, because he was from a broken family, and she was the only one that, as a child, he looked up to. He found security and safety into and whatnot, maybe to an obsessive level, but that was his personal quarrel, and Kenshin, the main character, killed her in cold blood. So his entire life has been like a spiral of complete, utter wreckness because of that, and there's no way of atoning for that. You can't just say sorry, you can't say, oh, I've been helping other people. That doesn't work like that. That's just making yourself feel better. That's not adding to any kind of thing. Morality, again, comes into play there. Or you're like, are you morally doing the right thing? Or are you just trying to make, yourself feel better and just say, oh, I'm a better person now?
I want to talk about someone, because you brought up fictional example. I'd like to talk about real life example that I think this is the most interesting person of the 20th century.
Okay.
Robert J. Oppenheimer.
Okay.
For those that don't know, more or less the guy that headed the project to create the atomic bomb in the U.S. during World War II. And there were other people involved, but he was more or less the one, like, kind of overseeing everything, making all the parts work together. And if you talk to Oppenheimer through the creation, through the first use, and up until he saw what happened, Oppenheimer would have been the guy 100% of the time to give you every single argument for why the atomic bomb needed to be made. He'll give you the scientific argument of it needed to be done to prove that man could do it. He would give you the argument of the Nazis were working on their own. If we didn't get there first, they would have. He would give you every single argument about why the bomb should be made. He would give you every single argument about why the bomb should have been used, or why it was okay to use, why it wasn't morally wrong to use. And he believed all of it, 100%, otherwise he wouldn't have been working on the project. And then he saw the footage of the survivors, and he saw the footage of what it did to the cities of Nagasaki and
Hiroshima,
thank you. It was on the tip of my tongue. Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And Robert Oppenheimer became the strongest advocate in the world until his death against the use of nuclear weapons. He was the strongest advocate for the deproliferation of nuclear arms. Mm-hmm. Robert Oppenheimer was blacklisted by McCarthyism for his opposition to building more nuclear weapons, which was very, very dangerous for someone who lived in the Washington elite world like him. Robert Oppenheimer did everything he possibly could to stop everything he built his career up to. And so he is one of the most interesting people in the world because he clearly saw the horror that he caused, and he's the one that has the real famous quote about the atomic bomb from the Hindu from one of the Hindu books. I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. So he's a person who I do believe made the most genuine effort to atone for what he did. And yet, I will agree if someone says it doesn't matter, he still didn't.
Yeah, it's like the example you pulled up again. I was about to say when you were bringing that up again. It comes down to an essence of morality, and that actual atonement of true atonement is impossible, because you could say, because it obviously is after the incident that he then, all nuclear weapons just go against it. Obviously, a real case, and it probably was the case, was that he realised what happened to it. Like you said before, he could give you the scientific reason of why this was necessary, why this was thing and whatnot, and that's really easy and things to say when you are making this, when you're producing it. It is another thing to see what it can do. And then when he sees what it can do, morality kicks him in the fucking behind, and then he's then backtracking like hell, because he's like, crap. And what?
yes, that was his exact reaction.
No, if you want a proper British reaction, it's just bugger.
Stiff up a lip and all that.
Shite. Well, I botched this one up, lads. Guys, I may have buggered this up, but hear me out.
City burning in the background.
But hear me out. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. But, no, that's...
Oh, history jokes are so funny.
They are fun. I love doing them. The morality kicked him in the ass, and you could argue, obviously, when he went against nuclear weapons, that probably did help into some reform. Maybe he did, going against it, prevent another creation of something possibly worse or something of a similar quality happening. But again, this is from things. Is he just doing that because he knows what he's done? He's trying to make himself feel better.
You know, it's this. Okay, here's where I stand on this. Like, people are responsible for they're responsible for the things that they do, both good and bad, right?
Yeah.
So you do bad things, you lose your innocence. Like, you're not innocent of the crimes you commit, right? But at the same time, what do you really want? At the end of the day, do you want the future to be better? I think that it's, I guess, it goes against the idea that you want to make the future better by, like, saying, okay, you've already fucked up so much, it's not even worth trying to, not atone, but at least try to balance the scales of your guilt to innocence. You can never become innocent, but I mean, your guilt, I mean, when it comes to good versus bad deeds.
You can certainly take actions that demonstrate
how you
are
affected
ashamed
the
of
world.
that action.
You can take actions that will affect the proportions of how you've affected your sphere of influence, both positive and negative, right? And it's always better for you to try to take more actions that will benefit your sphere of influence. Despite bad things you've done in the past, you can still do good things, and you do get credit for the good things you do, but you still are to blame for everything you've ever done wrong. You're still guilty of that. You never lose your innocence when it comes to that. And it's just like, you can still, but knowing that, you can still do things that will positively influence people around you, and that will try to not ever relieve you of your guilt, but balance the scales of your good to bad actions.
Okay,
And
now
again,
how do you apply that to nations?
You know, I think
it's
that
a completely different ball game, because you're talking about multiple people.
Here's a good example of one. Here's a good example of one. Despite what you think of the United Nations today, the United Nations at the time, that was a real gesture to a lot of countries that had all been torn apart from war, and that, like, countries that were our enemies, that, like, we were, you know, at each other's throats. But at the end of the day, we decided, like, hey, look, we're going to help rebuild our enemies to some extent, and we're going to come together for once. And while that doesn't, you know, forgive the U.S. or any of these nations for the things that they've done, that's a real step towards repairing things, and that's a positive action in that time, in that context, for sure.
Okay, so do you think you're of the opinion then that you could never make up for the crime, but you can take actions to show that it was unacceptable, and you're going to make sure that you act in a way in which those actions or something similar will never happen again?
Yeah, you can absolutely, you know, try to do the exact opposite of what you've done wrong. You can absolutely.
Okay. Well, let me take that, and we're gonna circle back to Indian genocide. Yeah. When we talked about Britain giving India back to the Indians, America, of course, has Indian reservations, but they're notoriously in really shit real estate. Do you think that America should give back lands that it took? Do you think that it should give them back to to native ownership? As a gesture of good faith in continuing to help rebuild this nation, this people that are ravaged?
It depends. Like, you know, what's up about
because it's like I see what you're saying, but it's kind of hard to say we're gonna take action to show that we are repenting for this, and we're never gonna let it happen in the future, but we're gonna keep what we took. Like that's such a shit-eating grin kind of look, right? That's like, I know I stole your Rolex, but I'm not a thief anymore. I'm never gonna steal again, but I'm keeping your goddamn Rolex.
You know what? I can respect that. I respect it. You know what? I am going to keep your fucking Rolex. I like that in my country, okay? My country doesn't do politeness, okay?
Uh-huh. But like seriously, that's a really shitty thing. It's like I feel like in order to move forward, you do have to take, at least on some level, actions that can be taken that show that it is that what was done was terrible, like giving back the Black Hills.
Like it depends, because I don't know enough about like land ownership in the USA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to some
and it's a complicated issue. I'll agree.
To some extent, like I don't know enough about land ownership specifically in those areas. Like I don't like the idea of like because like this is ultimately, it would have to come down to like if someone like owned land on an Indian reservation, like maybe there's some way.
Yeah, and that's why the way Indian reservations work a lot right now is the reason we have so many Indian casinos in this country is because the United States kind of gave them shitty land, and so they opened up casinos so they could go buy more land from private owners. Is essentially what the Indian casino model is.
Let's add some states to the U.S. The Native American, like we'll make a state. Right, and it gets its own little thing, and we get a little cool star on the flag. We add like a Native American state, like. So
then we're gonna round them all up into one area. Let me tell you something.
No. Don't. That's not what I'm. We give them like some political power. We give them a voice. That's what I'm saying. Like you give them actual like rights to dictate themselves a little bit. Like I think that'd be cool. Like, you just give them a little bit more influence politically. And
I was about to say, you're putting up terrible setups there, because, like, let's put them all up in one circle.
Here's what we'll do. No, okay, I take it back. They don't have to... It's really just... You're just arguing about geography at this point. Like, if I said, like, all of the states spread across the U.S. count as one state, even, like, that wouldn't be a problem at that point.
Yeah, it is a very complicated thing, and I agree. It's such a hard thing to think about and think of solutions for, because it did happen a long ass time ago, and you can't like expect some motherfucker who moved to Kentucky from New York City and bought land and started his own farm. You can't expect him to fucking get up and go just because fucking 200 or like 170 years ago Andrew Jackson decided to commit genocide. Yeah, like you can't expect him to like give up his shit for that without some kind of compensation back.
Yeah,
that is, just reasonable.
That is something reasonable from his ancestors at that point.
Yeah,
his ancestors owe him something.
It is on one level reasonable, but at the same time, like I just imagine that guy complaining, and then like a crying Indian just looking at him, and the guy feeling like, oh, god damn it, I'm on this side of this argument. Fuck. Like, no one wants to be on the... Well, no, I take that back. Some people do. People who argue against giving Indians land back are just the worst kind of human beings. But anyway, no reasonable person wants to be on that side of that argument, but on some level, it's like, well, shit. Like, that's it's unfair, but of course it's fucking unfair, because what was done was unfair in the first place.
You just have to
There's no logic to it at this point.
It's like, to compensate, you just have to continue to wrong other people. You just have to shift the wrongdoing to some other people.
And, like, maybe you could do it in a way that minimizes impact or whatever, but no, there is no easy solution to this where everyone gets to be happy.
The weirdest thing about situations like that is that if you think about it, the whole, for example, like, is a phrase here that's completely, like, if you think about it, unfounded. The whole, two wrongs don't make a right thing. That's kind of bull in the sense of that every time something's wrong that happened, in order to set it right, giant quotation marks here, because there is no right way to set it right, you have to wrong someone else. You have to wrong again and again and again and again and again. It's just a constant evolution.
And that's history, to be honest.
Yeah, that's history in general. You always will have to wrong someone.
History is straight fucked, guys.
Oh yeah, it started off with one wrong thing happened, and then everyone else had to keep wronging because there's no way of making it right.
My favorite thing, like, I love Kubrick's movies, and I won't talk about this for too long because it's so unrelated, but my favorite thing about 2001: A Space Odyssey is he shows that gorillas learn to use tools,
Yeah.
and the first thing they do with them is kill other gorillas.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
fuck yeah.
And that's not at all what happened. But I love the message he is making with that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, from the very beginning, it was straight fucked, guys.
Like, here's a good example of how politicalness kind of, how you have to, in order to make some things right, you have to do massive, like, things wrong. Like, in order to, see, this is weird true salvation bullshit here, but kind of, if you want to save the world, you have to then dirty your own hands immensely, and even then, you know, you're gonna have some people then calling you a piece of shit. Like, I'm gonna use a piece of fiction, for example, here. Like,
Ozymandias.
Say again?
Ozymandias, Watchmen.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good one. But I'm gonna use a piece of fiction here.
Giant squid.
Yes. I'll use a piece of fiction, for example. There is a story where a man, like, the world's fucked. It's like a fictionalized world where there's machines, there's mechs, what have you. But the world's fucked over a dictatorship of one country dictating all others. They take over countries and they rename them areas. And they rename the citizens no longer their nationality, but by numbers. So countries become 11s, 12s, 13s, whatnot. Complete utter dictatorship. One dude becomes a terrorist, rallies all the other ones, becomes a rebellion, makes it a gigantic thing, overthrows the dictatorship, becomes a political power. Yet the problem still doesn't go away. In fact, it just resurfaces. He realizes what the problem is. The problem is that the world needs to focus its hate on something, and then he needs to get rid of said hate. So he becomes the biggest fucking douche ever. He takes over the dictatorship, becomes a new one, gets like a bunch of nukes, bombs the crap out of everything. The world collectively hates him. Actually, for the first time, comes together to fight him. And then sets it up in front of everyone, himself, of him getting staged, of him dying. He kills himself because he hires an assassin to kill him. And then collectively, the world's hate's gone because it was all focused on this one man. He died, caused a lot of shit, like none of that stage, he killed a lot of people, but then simultaneously, through his death, through hating this one person and then making it all go away, now everyone's managed to come together to rebuild and to redone the things that he did. But nothing can take away the things that he did were fucking awful, but he made something really good out of it.
You know, Alex has one of my favorite jokes of all time, and I'm like so jealous that I wasn't the one to come up with this.
What's this?
The reason we call revolutions revolutions is because we start in the same place or we end in the same place that we started.
No, that's good, actually. That was good.
I fucking love that joke.
There's some weight to that as well. That's the funny.
Right? Everything just goes back to where it all started in the first place. It's just a lot of people die along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is that idea of, well, could we all unify in our hate? And the answer is no. That is an overly simplistic way of looking at things. You want an example? Syria.
That's kind of a good one.
That's the fucking perfect example. Everyone hates Assad. Sure. You know what? It's not helping much unity.
Then that's when you get into actions. What have they done? Because then you're going to get, like, dividedness. Like, if you want to get, like, modern day politicals, obviously Trump. So, like, collectively you have a lot of people that don't like him, but still you have his supporters, otherwise he wouldn't have gone to the power he does. So that's when you get into actions like, for like world collective hate. You would need to have like no redeemable qualities whatsoever, like at all.
And the question is, of course, could you get into power if you were that kind of person?
If you were that kind of person, exactly. Well, without doing
that's why I think like Watchmen and Ozymandias is a good example, but this is all way too tangential to the main topic at hand. it's an interesting thing, and Raska, I agree. There's no easy answer. The fact very well might be that there is not an answer, that you can never make up for it. You can certainly take actions to show that you are trying to make up for it, but the answer will never be that you've evened the scales. Because genocide, slavery are crimes for which there is no coming back. But they're also crimes that most nations that exist today committed at one point or another in their history.
Yeah.
I think that's important to know.
No one's clean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm native, and I'm native Hispanic origins, some from tribes down in that region, and the big one was the Aztecs, who killed like 20,000 people a day at the height of their empire through human sacrifice from people that they captured in war. I'm not advocating for that. I'm not saying that they were innocent.
I'm not agreeing with that. That might have been a little crazy.
We just gotta learn to love how horrible we all are. We just gotta learn to love it, guys.
We gotta have a little love and
You're
peace.
beautiful. You're beautiful. It's true.
Oh shit! And now we get the copyright strike. Yeah, there's no denying that every nation in history is guilty of something horrible for which they could never make up. And I say that, and there's probably one, but you know what?
Fuck that.
They're just really good at hiding it.
Yeah.
Castro, Stalin, Hitler, group hug. Come on, everybody, come on in.
Yeah.
Jackson, get over here. You're invited to this group hug.
Well, no, and I'm not trying to diminish the qualities, because I've always said you can't objectify human suffering, but fundamentally some, crimes are worse than others. How you rank them it gets messy, but there's a difference between, burning a village and executing millions of people.
And nuking a city.
Yeah, there's
a difference there.
Yeah, there's a difference
The
between
scale
those
is slightly, it's slightly different.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't change the fact that there are still crimes in every nation's history. That doesn't make it okay. I do think it is worth noting, because it is kind of this temptation to say, oh, well, this group was completely innocent, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, they weren't completely innocent. They were innocent of, they clearly didn't deserve what happened to them, but they weren't completely innocent. No one's completely innocent. It's a very, very tricky moral question. It seems like it should be an easy answer. Hey, this government committed genocide. That shouldn't be a thing that's in power anymore. But that was hundreds of years ago. Well, then maybe. I don't know. Questions are hard.
It's all about who got the biggest dick.
Might makes right. There are no moral problems with might makes right. We've all learned that. The answer is there is no answer. I do think that's the case, but that doesn't mean, okay, walk away from the problem, there's nothing you can do about it. That means you need to challenge yourself to really think. And honestly, I think the best way that you can take responsibility for benefiting from the atrocities committed in the past of your nation, because again, we all have them, is to be aware of them. And not just like, okay, I read up on this. Actually look into it. Actually look into what was done. Try to get a good idea of the play-by-play of events. And try your best to really put yourself there and understand it. I think that's the best that you can do. That's the best you can do on a personal level. There are other things that can be done now. But I think on a personal level for a person of limited resources, even if you are still tangentially benefiting from what was done, I think the best thing you can do is just try fundamentally to understand it, because I feel the worst thing about history is that the terrible becomes the norm. And I think the worst thing about history is that a lot of it is forgotten.
Unfortunately, it always will be.
Yeah, and so, like, we talk about these horrible genocides and stuff. Who here knows about the Battle of Wounded Knee Creek? And not just a question for YouTube, but a question for the audience. Like, if you don't know about it, look it up now. That's worth knowing about. That's worth remembering. There's still things that can be done to, at the very least, symbolically make up for that. And I think that, like, if you can push to do anything, no matter how minuscule, it should still be done.
The main problem with it is, in general, is that with and it's never going to change. This is like, we have like a massive problem that unfortunately will never get fixed. It's just a human thing, never to quote an episode of Cowboy Bebop. Our greatest flaw is the fact that we learn how to fix our mistakes. Problem is that we quickly forget those mistakes ever happened to begin with, so we do it all over again. That's generally how it works.
Well, I'm feeling pretty good about this episode. Does anyone have anything else they want to add? Any other additional thoughts, lingering ideas?
No.
America.
America. Yep.
Britain.
Yeah.
Motherfucker.
Hey, we whooped your ass once. Don't make us do it again. Just fucking kidding.
I will use my crumpets.
Rematch of the century.
How fucking bizarre would it be if, like, Britain just invaded tomorrow, just out of fucking nowhere?
And you just see me in a general's officer uniform.
It's like, Kieran, you gave away the plan!
Shit.
Oh, shite.
Oh, bugger.
America and Britain were like Rocky and Apollo Creed. You know, we had to have a few scuffles. There was a rematch, and then we came in for the bro hug.
The problem is I'd be the worst general ever. I'd like have like all my forces just ask me why I don't go out in the front lines, and I said, well, it's just like, the thing is, I don't want to die. And I start packing my bags and like getting ready to desert. It's just like, it doesn't sound like you enjoyed soldiering at all in your many years, which, you know, started today, but we'll say many years. And it's just like, well, I did enjoy soldiering back when the prerequisite for a British campaign is that the enemy under no circumstances should carry guns. Even spears made us think twice.
Oh, Winston Churchill.
Yeah, history jokes will win.
Yeah. Okay.
The kind of people we'd like to fight were armed with Watusi warrior sticks and dried grass.
Oh, that's so sad because it's so true. Kieran, what are we talking about next week since you're joining us?
Oh, we're talking about next week, are we? Next week we are talking about something that is somewhat related to history. We are talking about an anime series. Holy shit, guys, are we all surprised that what I picked was an anime series?
No.
Well, fuck you. We're talking about a series called Fate Zero.
Yeah, and unfortunately there are like too many episodes to watch in a week, so we're just gonna watch the first 5. Is that cool with you, Rasco?
Yeah, that's cool with me.
We are watching the beginning of Fate Zero.
Indeed. We'll discuss
I've
the
heard
first...
of this before. I know this title, and I've yeah.
So fucking good.
Should be interesting. And then join us, well, actually, before that episode's posted, you will have, on the 24th, a review of Titanic posted, and then a special episode that we're going to record right now.
Time traveling.
Yeah, we're going to record right after we finish this episode. We're going to talk about God damn it! I decided it, and now I can't decide whether or not I should stick with that. Okay, I've got two possible topics. We'll debate it out real quick right now. We can either talk about how history is taught, or we can discuss that history is dirty. Which do you prefer?
History is dirty. What does that mean?
History is dirty.
History is dirty would be the idea that, like, it's not, there are no heroes, there are no good guys, no bad guys. It is a very morally gray thing.
That one.
Or we could talk about the way in which we teach history.
I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna say how we teach history. That's what I'm gonna say.
Okay, Kieran?
My vote is the exact opposite.
Okay, I'm actually gonna stick with how we teach history because I feel like we kind of just talked about how fucking dirty history is with this episode.
That's true.
Whoop, whoop.
Okay. So everyone, thank you very much for watching. Please tune in on Thanksgiving Day for our review of Titanic and our discussion on how it is we teach history. And, stay tuned next week for the Fate Zero discussion. It should be fun. Woo. And then next month, join us for Holiday Month. I've got a special guest lined up for the whole month. It should be fun. Anyway, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Wandering Samurai.
And I...
Who interrupts people.
The Walrus. The Walrus. Terrible.
Are you? What are you, Rasco? What are you?
I'm the Walrus.
And we are your Geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.